He is a philosopher, a political scientist, a university professor, and a full member of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. His main research area is political theory and the social and political issues of globalization. He was the director of the Institute of Political Science of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, where we were colleagues and friends, and he was my boss from 2000. He was the director general of the King Sigismund College and then rector until 2016. He studied in Debrecen and at the Eötvös Loránd University, and later at the University of Frankfurt and at Harvard University. In 1979, he joined the Institute of Philosophy of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences as a researcher, and then he later transferred to the Institute of Social Sciences at the Academy. So he has a very good interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary background, which is what we also represent in Kőszeg. In 1990, he became a scientific advisor of the reorganized Institute of Political Science, and he was the director there until 2009. So he's been a visiting professor both in Hungary and abroad, and in 2005, he received the Pázmány Péter Prize. In addition, between 1997 and 2003, he was the president of the Hungarian Political Science Society. So his major areas of research are political theory and the social and political kind of consequences of globalization. And here I show you one of his newest books, which is Felboldult Világ, which I think would be translated as kind of chaotic world or something like that. He initially dealt with problems of pluralism and neo-Kantian social theory. And in the period after the change of regime, he laid the foundations of political theory in Hungary, primarily in terms of legitimacy, freedom, and political thinking. And in the 2000s, he dealt with the study of social and political changes related to globalization, where he saw a radical change in the environment of politics and national culture. So he has many publications on regime change, examining the processes in a global context. And he interpreted the transformation of political traditions and the rise of populism and extremism as a response to the challenges of globalization. You can see we share a lot of themes together, József and I. He has initiated and led a number of European and domestic research projects, and is the author or co-author of more than 150 scientific publications in Hungarian, German, and English, including, if you allow me to highlight it, our joint editorship of the volume that was called From Transition to Globalization, which we published in 2007. So of course, that volume is available in our library. So it's a real pleasure to welcome Professor Bayer to our Future of Europe lecture series. And Professor, it is now your floor.
Thank you very much. I must say I was very glad to have Jody and Ferenc in the Institute of Political Science as my colleagues. And I am glad that they lead now such a marvelous institution and courses in Kőszeg. Now I begin with my lecture, Globalization for and Against, in the light of pandemic and economic recession. Discussing globalization requires first a short clarification of its meaning, because globalization is mostly a political buzzword full of preconceptions and biases. For globalists, so-called globalists, the notion has a utopic flavor. It will lead to a unified, peaceful, free world. For anti-globalists, just the opposite. It would lead us to an evil, uniform world full of repression, exploitation, depriving people of their values and identities. The scholarly discourse of globalization is more objective. It regards globalization a complex social process just happening without a final destination. We have to understand this process in order to turn it for the better. The biggest picture of this process refers to the whole human evolution. Since spreading from Africa to the whole world, to the whole globe, our species created different cultures and societies, set up various economic and political regimes, developed slowly through stages to the modern world. Transactions and communications between societies always existed, but never that extent and that intense and that quick as today. Since the birth of capitalist market economy in the 16th century, the Industrial Revolution and world trade, the process of globalization accelerated tremendously. And at the end of the 20th century, it took a great leap forward. This newest push happened during the neoliberal turn of economic policy. That means it had a political origin. Political decisions began this process to accelerate. The revolution of transporting, information and communication technology supported the steady flow of capital, goods, services, information, and people. Time and space seem shrinking. Borders become porous. A new dynamic set in, leading to a connected world. Huge transnational corporations emerged and built a dense network of production, transport infrastructures, and digital communication networks. This was promoted by the disappearance of a political opponent, a challenge, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the new state capitalist turn of China. Now the whole world obeys the same economic laws, determined by financialization of modern capitalism, which is often called as casino capitalism. A neoliberal, deregulated, breakneck globalization began with these political decisions, changes. Many critics argue today, therefore, that globalization requires a course correction, getting a socially more responsible and equitable form. In its present form, globalization is full of contradictions. It is not even. It is not full-fledged. It's only partial. Some elements of it are overdeveloped, others underdeveloped. Some big countries benefited from it due to better integration into the world market, such as China, India, Brazil, while others felt hit by its bad effects. Advanced countries suffered also some of its negative effects. Whole industries wandered away into cheap labor countries, causing recession and joblessness in the homeland. In some parts of the world, people don't enjoy the blessings of globalization. In many failed states, society sinks in chaos, forcing huge swarms of migrants flee to better places for their livelihood. Mass migration, on the other hand, causes great political tensions in the more advanced countries and strengthens populist movements and political regimes heavily opposing any mass migration. In some other countries, great divisions appear between beneficiaries and losers of globalization. Inequalities and social distance grew between definite social groups. Members of elite groups are mobile, know foreign languages, have better resources and skills to take advantage of global opportunities. Others, often large social groups, are dependent of the local economy, closed in their local language, lack the skills, resources, and networks to benefit from globalization. This way, globalization creates as many problems as it resolves. The process is followed with great enthusiasm on one side and with ressentiment and anger on the other side. What are the most detrimental consequences of globalization? I begin with the bad side. It induces often regional or even global financial crises because of deregulated markets. It leads to environmental degradations, even to a human-caused climate change. It reconfigurates the political field. National sovereignty diminishes. The parallel process of political fragmentation, dissolutions of states, and integration into great integration units sets in, which is called by political scientists fragmentation and integration at the same time. It causes often political alienation due to social strains and deepening inequalities. It undermines often national cultures due to the growing impact of the global media, causing identity crises in traditional societies. And last but not least, new geopolitical rivalries emerge between great powers, notably between the US and China in contemporary world. The good sides of globalization are not less obvious. Worldwide interconnectedness, both in economic transactions, political exchanges, cultural and scientific discourses. The global infrastructure, transport lines, network cables, etc., of the modern world binds us more together as it separates us. Borders remain meaningful, but get more and more porous. Everybody likes the blessings of free movement, at least who can afford it. But many don't welcome foreign migrants. Global supply chains and free trade provide us with cheap goods manufactured elsewhere and delivered to our local markets. Access to the information highway on the worldwide net, it's a good thing. High-tech gadgets like personal computers and phones represent one of the most welcome blessings of globalization. We could not discourse with each other without these gadgets. Political benefits are also remarkable. Diminished distances between different races lessens also systematic racism within societies. It challenges also gender discrimination, even in traditional societies. Ideas of human and civil rights spread in the worldwide. Democratic and civic engagement becomes also more widespread than ever. A global civil society is in the making. It is a major topic of Ferenc Misliwecz, my colleague. A rule-based international order with its political institutions brings countries together in a lawful cooperation. Take the United Nations and its institutions. Few people associate them with globalization, but it is one of its most important expressions. The so-called Westphalian order of sovereign states became the universal norm of political existence for countries. Deep conflicts between states remain. Even wars occur, but may be managed better than ever before. Institutions of global governance emerge abound, even if they are dominated presently by great powers. such as in the World Trade Organization or the World Bank, etc. Regional integrations like the European Union emerge, which don't destroy nations, their member states, but pools their sovereignty in order to meet common challenges like economic management, welfare regimes, health insurance policies, providing civil and political rights, etc. You may ask, where will this breakneck globalization drive us to the end? Not necessarily into a brave new utopia. It is told by some futurologists, if mankind survives the next century, it will have a bright future. But there are more dangerous paths into the future as well. The four riders of Apocalypse, a strong symbol taken from John's book of Revelation from the Bible, are regarded now the following ones. Nuclear Armageddon. It is not closed out. It is still very, very much possible. A very dangerous event, which is might be alleviated also by the emergence of robotic warfare. The second, global pandemics. I come to this back right now. The third is ecological degradation. And the fourth, social collapse due to strains caused by global warming and mass migrations of societies. The COVID SARS-2 pandemic may be regarded, in my opinion, as a strong warning sign about coming evils, even if it is not as lethal than former, more lethal earlier epidemics. We almost failed to cope with it. And it is very important to change this. Now I come to the second part of my lecture on the pandemic and its consequences. A famous sociologist, Branko Milanovic, thinks that the present pandemic is the first really global event because it affects almost everybody, hits every continent, regardless of residence or social class, every man and women. And it will be a definitive experience of our whole generation. I cite Milanovic: fear, tedium, isolation, lost jobs and wages, lockdowns, government restrictions and face masks. No other event comes close, even if we have big international events such as Olympics and so on. We can follow the news about it all across the globe, every day in real time. It is actually a very odd experience of globality, because in order to defend us, we need social distancing, masking, and controlling. Schooling, working, discussing scientific topics, all happens devoid of human physical touch. It's a very sorry story. We are bound together only virtually through the internet, but it's still better than nothing. But will it lead to the end of globalization, this pandemic? No. In reality, it may trigger a new and even stronger wave of it. The pandemic demonstrates the necessity of global cooperation in order to avoid future pandemics with devastating effects and consequences. It is true that global connection alleviated much the spread of the coronavirus, but it is not global connection what is killing us, but global connection without global cooperation. Namely, at the beginning, the outbreak of the pandemic caused serious disruptions. Every nation turned inward, introduced unilaterally travel bans, export controls, centralized information commands, etc. Global supply chains of the global trade got blocked. Huge container ships hanged in the harbors, full of supply components for car industries and any other manufactured goods. Every national government wanted to take care first for their own citizens and forgot about international obligations. It seemed as if the global pandemic would trigger a strong incentive for deglobalization. Such a policy might be welcomed in some countries led by populist politicians. Even the US government under Trump began to demolish global cooperation on many issues. Global trade, the Paris Treaty on Climate, and the WHO, that is the World Health Organization. However, the pandemic requires global efforts of science, sharing health information, and cooperation of pharmaceutical firms, companies to defeat it. The COVID pandemic is a huge challenge also for the European Union. At the beginning, the Commission was not able to coordinate a unified response to it. The Schengen area lost its relevance. Many countries closed their borders for all foreign citizens. Not only migrants, even commuting workers were stopped at the borders, as it happened in Hungary also, with migrant workers from Romania and Serbia. A grave economic recession set in within the EU. In all countries, the GDP fell generally about 7 to 8%. In order to keep the economy running, national emergency measures have been introduced. Debt obligations suspended, rescue provisions given for jobless workers and faltering businesses, workers in critical infrastructures like health institutions, food production, and retail got easily infected. Many died. Among them, many guest workers coming from Balkan and Central European regions. In Germany, for instance, the whole meat industry was in crisis because of this. In old age homes died not only elderly people, but also their servicing personnel. The contamination spread like fire. Many doctors and nurses died while trying to cure patients in hospitals. The virus spread gradually and unevenly. Governments didn't heed the prescriptions of the World Health Organization. Many hoped it will soon be over. The World Health Organization served as a leading source for expertise on the virus, sent teams to affected countries, helped poor nations build up their health capacities, advanced worldwide scientific cooperation, combated misinformation, promoted international health regulations. But the organization is largely underfunded. We waited much more from it than it could provide. Governments don't want to delegate their sovereignty even to this organization. This has to be changed for the future. Politicians often belittled or even denied the danger, like Donald Trump saying it's only a kind of flu, or Bolsonaro in Brazil, making the citizens paying a hard price for the delay. A lot of conspiracy theories emerged about the pandemic, focused on scapegoating foremost and stirring up hate towards foreigners. It was also Donald Trump tried to denounce it as a Chinese disease. Scientists, doctors, technocrats behaved in this situation much more rational than politicians. It brings to my mind a joke. Dr. Hale, a famous priest to the US Senate, was once asked whether he used to pray for the senators. He answered, "No, I look at them and begin to pray for the country." This reminds me also on Churchill's saying, "Politicians are well able to behave rationally, but only after they had tried out every other possibilities." This was also, in my opinion, the case in our countries, but I don't want to go into politics. Repeating waves of the pandemic largely forced governments to cooperate. Research institutions and pharmaceutical companies collaborated to find out the nature of the virus. Doctors developed health protocols and medicines in order to stop spreading the disease. At last, vaccines have been developed, and now campaigns for vaccination are en route. Due to global collaboration and combined efforts, we can defeat the pandemic, even if it will remain with us for a prolonged time. It is not a very lethal pandemic. Nevertheless, the virus is mutating. It becomes more lethal, it's spreading faster, going through the second and third waves already, in some countries, even the fourth. How did the European Union react to this challenge? Slowly, but at the end, effectively. The European Commission sponsored and invested into research and set up a common vaccination framework in order to distribute the vaccines fairly among the member states and also other European states. It also takes part in the so-called COVAX program of the World Health Organization, which wants to help poorer nations to get vaccines. The European Union developed recently a recovery plan to combat the pandemic. After long hesitation and the hard negotiation process, it accepted a huge stimulus package for a common economic recovery program financed by a European Central Bank. You may find details on the EU website, eceurope.eu, under the heading Recovery Plan for Europe. Yeah, you can find every details about these programs. Besides the normal financial 7-year plan, it contains a program called Next Generation EU. This is a combined effort of relief aids and loans in order to get the economy back on track. It contains a 672 billion euro project in loans and grants to support reforms and investments in EU countries to mitigate the economic and social impact of the pandemic. It set up several funds for regional development and social issues. Besides an investment initiative, further elements of the program involve 3 additional funds: the European Regional Development Fund, the European Social Fund, the European Fund for Aid to the Most Deprived. On this website, you can find the breakdown of this Next General EU plan. You can see how many billion euros are given to each of the programs. Economic forecasts prognose now a quick recovery of economic growth for the next year. Suppose the vaccination campaign reaches soon the much hoped herd immunity. If something like this exists at all. This takes time because the EU Commission was too slow and behaved not too clever in its negotiation efforts to secure enough vaccines from the producers. It was, in my opinion, a failure to let such negotiations, such deals made by politicians. It should have, how to say, given over to trade experts. The question arises, what can we do to avoid future health disasters inducing such deep economic recessions? A lot of recommendations are discussed in the international community of scientists and politicians. More investments are needed into the research facilities. Information sharing and warning systems should be set up. Higher corporate taxation is needed to meet the costs of global effort, including elimination of offshore tax havens. I read in the news that the Biden administration wants to raise the corporate tax from 21 to 28% and increase the rate of American firms' overseas profits from 10% to at least 21%, calculated on a country-by-country basis so that it captures all tax havens. The new Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen, calls for a global minimum tax on companies. I took this from The Economist, the latest issue. Better guarantees are needed for workers' rights, also for platform workers. A more equitable distribution of wealth is necessary in whole Europe. Initiation of a European Union-wide minimal income threshold is seriously considered, and other welfare measures as well, in the sense of the new Pact on Social Europe initiative. The famous economist of globalization, Danny Roderick, recommends even a better organized and stately controlled labor migration policy and a corrected course of globalization, what he calls, we need not more, but smart globalization. Against a neoliberal deregulation policy, he declares some fields like health and education should be regarded as public goods, which should receive more resources, much more. Governments should receive free hands for local development projects, for better employment frames, supported by the budget. Some people say, after this pandemic, nothing can remain as it was. We need to change everything. Others say, nothing will change. We shall return to normalcy, to the old way of things. What is your opinion? I would be glad to hear from you your opinions and suggestions. And of course, I'm ready to answer your questions as well, as far as I can. Thank you very much for your attention.